What is the most badass thing your parent has ever done? My dad climbed over a 6-foot-high wrought iron fence with spikes on top to escape the memory care wing of an assisted living facility. Twice. My father was a petroleum marketing executive who worked in Rockefeller Center in NYC and played golf on the weekends. One winter day, we were skating on a local pond when a large group decided to play Crack the Whip. Unfortunately, several kids disconnected from the end of the whip, went flying off at high speed and went through thin ice into the freezing water. Immediately, my father crawled out onto the thin ice, pulled out a couple of the kids and handed them off to other adults to be wrapped in blankets and taken home. He's long gone, but I wish I could tell him how much I admired him for going out on that ice to save those kids. I guess you can determine what badass is or isn't, but my father was a pharmacist. One of his best friends was a physician, our family doctor, and became addicted to pills. He was trying to get my dad to supply him, but my dad told him no, and told him he had to get help. The doctor cursed him and was mad as hell, but after he got into recovery he told my father he saved his life and was the best friend he ever had. I don't know if that's badass, but it made me proud of him when my mom told me years later. My mom threw sand in a mom's eyes who kid wouldn't stop throwing sand in my eyes. LOL. My grandpa burned down the house of a creep trying to mess with my Aunt Dot. One time I was in the car with my mom, I was probably like 7 or 8, and we came around the corner and there were these two men on this sidewalk, one on top of the other, just beating the shit out of him. My mom, a middle-aged health department worker who was probably wearing a cardigan and glasses around her neck with a glasses string, pulls up next to them and reaches over me to roll down the window and tells the guy very calmly to stop and that's not okay. He's so surprised at this he just looks at us and is like, "Ooh, sorry." And she goes, "Get off of him please," and then he did. My mind was blown. My mom worked 2 jobs while going to night school to become a nurse when she divorced my dad and became a single mom with 2 little ones. I don't think I could do it. My mother worked as a sanction buster in the 80s in Africa, running a company that imported medical supplies, antibiotics, ambulances, and so on through closed borders into sanctioned countries and regions and conflict zones, so they could keep their medical services running. She has had more AK-47 shoved in her face than most humans, and has some utterly harrowing stories from her time in conflict zones in Mali, Liberia, Mauritania, and Sierra Leone. When I was 5 I was put into Al Petit daycare center. My first day I'm going to the bathroom. I had unzipped my pants and my dong was out. This kid walks up behind me and says, "Hey, you wanna play P-War?" I ask what that is. He says the first one of us to pull it out when he says go and pee on the other wins. Being 5 I didn't think ahead much. Apparently the kid didn't either. I agree. He says go, and being that my whiner was already out, I hose him down. Naturally, he starts crying. Hard. I get taken to the office. Big trouble. They call my mother. She comes in. Now, my mother is the living embodiment of all that is evil. I'm only alive today because I learned to sleep with one eye open and escape murder attempts. I'm not joking. The ladies in the office explain what happened and tell her rules of the stupid game we played. My mother enraged. Fire. She started screaming at the ladies. WTF? All I heard as she took me away was my son fucking won. Don't play games if you don't want skit to happen or something to that effect. It was cool because it was the only time in my 50 years of life my mother ever stood up for me. And in a huge way. I got him no trouble and some other kid got pissed on. My dad worked 2 jobs, one of them ended too late to catch the bus, and he rarely could find a ride home, so he would walk 12 miles at 1 a.m. in the morning to get home. He did that about 3-4 times a week for about a year before he could afford a car. Seeing him do that helped me realize that we can do anything if we set our mind to it. My mom was in basic training when it changed from the US Women's Army Corps to women being integrated in the regular army, so she was in one of the first groups of women to serve in this capacity. She is from a coal area of Pennsylvania, so there weren't many opportunities. Her parents told her she should be a teacher or nurse, but she decided to enlist at 17. Her parents were not happy. She was never in combat or anything like that. She was in a support role, but had interesting stories about her service, especially when units were trying to figure out how to integrate women and how hard they had to work to be accepted. My dad dislocated his shoulder somehow when I was about 9 years old. Later that week I got to go to work with him one day. He was a Navy chaplain detailed to the Marines. I wanted to go check out the physical fitness course while we were on base. So we got to go watch the soldiers run the course and climb all the obstacles and stuff, which was cool to watch. One of the commanding officers was speaking to my father and joked about him being able to pass the pull-ups portion, as a friendly joke. So my dad walked over and completed 5 pull-ups with one arm. I was and still am stunned that he could do it. My dad faced down mob threats to himself and his family, while taking steps to keep us safe and while maintaining his business integrity. Just as with everything in his life, he just did it as if it was no big deal. He was a stand-up guy. Can I use my Nana? She was born in rural Canada in 1920. She passed in 2019. She moved to a very big city and did a Master's of Social Work. In her role as a social worker, she got her single female single mom clients birth control. It was illegal for unmarried women to use birth control, and she was part of an underground network moving forms of birth control into the hands of the people who needed it. Not exactly the kind of answer you're asking for, but anyway. For some reason I had this recurring nightmare as a kid where a bunch of bad guys would kidnap my dad and put him in a van before going away. I told my dad about the dream, and he said, well, Daddy would just kick these guys' asses or something along those lines. The nightmare never came back after that. My parents lived in the middle of nowhere, Alaska, only accessible by plane, and built a lodge and cabins. No electricity, heat via wood stove, hunted and trapped for food. The stories they have are pretty amazing. When I was in kindergarten, the teachers had this weird idea that the bigger kids were smarter, so they expected more from them. I have always been the smallest. I'm also disabled, so the teachers didn't think I was smart at all. When it came time to learn to read, I was immediately put in the remedial group. No testing or anything. Just straight in. That group basically didn't do much of anything, so I wasn't learning. My mom has always been highly non-confrontational, but when she heard about the remedial group and me not learning, she actually went in and demanded the work material. She brought it home, and over spring break she taught me to read. The school always had this thing where they would test you and then bring you to the principal, and they would look at your chart and say something like, oh, you can read 20 words. That's wonderful, or stuff like that. When it came my time, the principal looked at my chart and in a voice of utter shock said, you can read 60 words. Yes, the small disabled kid that you didn't even try to teach can read 3 times better than the other kids. Even the tall ones I now write for a living. My dad hit my uncle so hard he fell over a picnic table. BC, he called my mom a whore. She's not a whore. My father escaped from the USSR in 1961. My father was having a chat with a friend that he saw in a store. Manager, you guys are going to have to leave. Dad, I'm not leaving, manager. Then you'll be thrown out, Dad. I don't see anyone here big enough to throw me out, manager. What's your name, Dad? Tells name, what's your name? Manager, you can call me anything you want. Dad, how about son of a bitch? My mom was a civilian codebreaker during WW2. My dad went to prison for stealing a few $100,000. Apart from raising 4 kids successfully, the below one, my dad went to get my passport from the regional passport office. I am out of state and he went there. They gave him hard time that this is not right, that is not right, expecting a bribe. My dad tore the application and all the papers and shouted at the passport officer, do you know why so many people sitting here to get the passport? It's to leave this godforsaken country. With this, the senior officer came out, calmed him down, and written the application herself and got the passport. My brother told me how badass it was to go into Central Federal Government office and do this. I wouldn't even have balls to raise my voice to anyone. My dad was accosted outside work once, and when the guy lunged at him, his years of karate study kicked in. He popped the guy in the nose, dropping him straight to the ground. I lived in the hood with my mom for a few years as a kid. The street our apartment faced was a one-way street. One day we were coming home, and this super thugged out car with like 25 wheels and a very scary driver. We came nose to nose with him and my mom wouldn't back up. She was like, no, fuck you, you're going the wrong way, asshole. I was shitting my pants and begging her to just back up and let him go. He ended up backing up and letting us pass and let us live. My father was the vice president of a small college. When he turned 50, he retired from his job, moved into the dorm at the state university, and completed law school. He became a lawyer at age 53 and spent the next 20 years working as an attorney.